Elias Kale had never imagined that at 27, he would be standing in a palace light years from Earth, about to wed an alien queen. He had grown up in a small city on Earth, a place where people worried more about daily survival than the politics of interstellar empires. Yet here he was, chosen not just for diplomacy but for his reputation as a human who could think differently, who could turn weakness into strength. His parents had been proud, though worried, telling him that humanity's future rested on his shoulders. It felt like more than just a burden. It was a test of the human spirit itself. The palace of Queen Velrissa rose like a crystal monument on the heart of the Zalarian capital. Its towers shimmered with colors that no human eye had names for, and its corridors echoed with a language that sounded almost musical. Zalarians were taller than humans, with elongated limbs, luminous skin, and eyes that seemed to see into one's thoughts. They were beautiful, yes, but every beauty carried a dangerous edge. Among them, Queen Velrissa was feared. She had won wars with intellect and strength, and legends of her strategies spread across the galaxy like fire. She was the last person Elias expected to impress, yet he had no choice but to try. The first meeting with the queen was formal and intimidating. He was led through vast halls by attendants who barely acknowledged him, finally arriving at a room where Velrissa waited. She sat upon a throne that seemed carved from light itself. Her gaze swept over Elias with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She had heard of humans, how they survived against odds that would crush other species, but she had never seen one in person. "You are Elias Kale," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "The human who will wed for peace. You carry your species' hope." Her words were measured, but Elias could feel the weight of expectation behind them. "Yes, your majesty," Elias said, keeping his voice steady. "I hope to honor the trust of my people. You will need to prove yourself in ways I will judge carefully." Their thinking was rigid, based on logic and history, while humans could see patterns others could not. He began to see that his survival, and perhaps his success, would depend on using that human advantage. Velrissa observed him quietly as he adjusted to life in the palace. At first, she saw only a young human, awkward and inexperienced. But she noticed how he listened, not just with his ears but with his mind. He asked questions that seemed naive but often revealed truths the Zalarians ignored. She watched him solve minor disputes among the council members, and his solutions, though unorthodox, were effective. There was a spark in him, a kind of courage that could not be measured in their usual metrics. It intrigued her. Meanwhile, back in human colonies, the war raged on. News of skirmishes and lost outposts arrived through encrypted messages. Humans were fighting desperately, using every ounce of ingenuity to survive against enemies who had superior technology and numbers. Elias read every report, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. He knew that his role in the palace could not be merely symbolic. If he failed, humanity might lose everything. One evening, as he walked along the terrace of the palace, he watched the alien city below. Lights shimmered like liquid crystals, and flying crafts moved with precision he had never imagined. He felt small, almost insignificant, yet he also felt a strange confidence. Humans had survived for centuries on fragile planets, facing predators, disasters, and each other. They had adapted, learned, and risen again. Perhaps that same spirit could guide him here. A week into his stay, the first true test came. The Queen's Council presented him with a problem that had stumped Zalarian advisors for decades, a dispute between two powerful factions within the Empire. One wanted to expand aggressively into human territories, the other advocated for cautious diplomacy. The Council expected Elias to take a side or fail. Instead, he proposed a solution that neither faction had considered: a temporary alliance with neutral worlds to provide resources and intelligence, giving both sides time to evaluate the risks of expansion. The Council was shocked. This human had dared to propose a strategy that seemed simple but solved multiple conflicts at once. Velrissa's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in curiosity. This human was different. Unlike many species she had faced, humans did not rely solely on power or history. They used creativity, intuition, and above all, courage. "You have potential," Velrissa said later in private. "But potential alone does not win wars. You must also understand the nature of power here." Days turned into weeks, and Elias began to notice subtle tensions within the court. Some council members openly doubted his abilities, whispering in corridors and questioning Velrissa's judgment. Others were curious, secretly observing him to learn how a human thought. Elias realized that diplomacy in this palace was a game of perception as much as strategy. Every word, every gesture, every look mattered. He also noticed the queen's own habits. Velrissa was brilliant, but even she had blind spots. She trusted tradition and logic above all else, sometimes underestimating the value of instinct and creativity. Elias made a mental note. If he could complement her strengths with human adaptability, they could become an unbeatable team. One afternoon, a message arrived from Earth, a colony under siege by an alien fleet. Elias' heart sank. Humans were suffering even as he tried to negotiate peace. He could not sit idly by. He approached Velrissa with a careful proposal to allow a small, covert human strike force to use Xylarian intelligence and technology to defend the colony. Velrissa studied him carefully. Allowing humans access to her empire's resources was risky, but she sensed the courage and conviction in Elias. She gave him permission, though cautiously, and warned him that failure would have dire consequences. The operation was tense. Elias coordinated with human commanders, adapting Xylarian strategies to human methods. What seemed reckless to the aliens, unexpected maneuvers, unconventional tactics, worked perfectly. The colony survived and the human forces held their ground. News of the victory reached Velrissa, who watched with a mixture of surprise and admiration. This human had done what she had thought impossible. He had turned apparent weakness into strength. By the end of the first month, Elias had earned cautious respect. Not all council members trusted him, but whispers of his ingenuity spread. Velrissa began to see him not merely as a pawn of diplomacy, but as a mind capable of understanding and shaping the empire itself. She still feared what humans might do if they failed, but she also realized that humans were far more dangerous and far more capable than most species believed. Elias, for his part, felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. He was far from home, in a world of alien customs and deadly politics, but he had already begun to make a difference. Humanity's survival depended on more than weapons. It depended on courage, intelligence, and the will to persevere. And he was determined to prove that the human spirit could not be crushed, even in the heart of a galaxy that had long doubted them. That night, as he looked up at the stars visible through the palace's crystal windows, he allowed himself a small moment of reflection. Humanity had always been underestimated. They had faced impossible odds before and had risen each time. If they could do it on Earth, why not here among the stars? Why not now in the shadow of a queen who feared nothing? Elias Kale felt the weight of his mission, but he also felt the thrill of possibility. The war was far from over, and the palace of Queen Velrissa was filled with challenges, rivalries, and dangers. Yet for the first time in his life, he felt that humanity could not only survive, it could thrive, and in the process, perhaps, change the course of the galaxy forever. The first chapter of his journey had begun, and already the galaxy was taking notice of the human who dared to stand among the stars. Elias Kale had begun to settle into the rhythms of the Xylarian palace, but comfort was a stranger in these halls. Every day brought new challenges, tests, and subtle competitions that he could not ignore. Even as he gained cautious respect, whispers followed him in corridors, and eyes watched every movement. Some council members openly doubted that a human could understand the complexities of an empire that had ruled the stars for millennia. Others, more clever, tried to learn from him, intrigued by the unorthodox ways in which he approached problems. One morning, the Queen summoned him to her private study, a room filled with shifting holographic maps and strategic simulations. Velrissa stood over a three-dimensional projection of the galaxy, her luminous fingers adjusting the display with precision. "You have learned our customs quickly, human," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "But knowledge alone is not enough. You must also prove your ability to act under pressure. The planet itself is not valuable to us, yet allowing instability, there could inspire other systems to rise against the Empire. I want you to advise on a plan to restore order without revealing Xylarian weaknesses." Traditional Xylarian forces relied on overwhelming firepower and strict formations, but he noticed something the Xylarians had overlooked. The rebels moved with human-like adaptability, using terrain and improvisation to their advantage. He leaned closer to the map. "Your Majesty, if I may," he began cautiously, "we can deploy a smaller, highly mobile force trained to think like the rebels. They can anticipate moves, set ambushes, and avoid unnecessary conflict. Large forces risk tipping off the opposition and provoking wider resistance. Sometimes what seems weak is stronger when applied wisely." The operation was risky. Failure could lead to the loss of Vera Prime and discredit both Elias and humanity's reputation. The first days of the operation were tense. The human-style squads moved through rugged valleys, predicting rebel movements and striking at key points with precision. Zalarian generals frowned, expecting mistakes, yet none came. Instead, the strategy worked. Rebel forces were contained, their leaders captured, and the planet stabilized without a full-scale battle. Word of the success reached the Queen. Velrissa observed Elias from the balcony of her palace, noting how he had taken initiative, studied the opposition, and applied unconventional tactics. She realized that humans could adapt to situations in ways her own species rarely could. They could anticipate unpredictability, think in angles and possibilities that logic alone could not predict. While the operation on Vera Prime succeeded, internal challenges within the palace were growing. Some council members resented the human influence, questioning whether Velrissa's attention to Elias distracted her from other important matters. Rumors began to circulate that Elias was too bold, that he was attempting to manipulate the Queen for personal gain. Elias was aware of the whispers but chose to focus on his mission. Let them talk. Results would speak louder than gossip. One evening, Velrissa invited Elias to dine with her privately. It was a rare honor, as few had access to the Queen in such an intimate setting. The table floated above a pool of luminescent water, casting soft light on their faces. Velrissa observed him carefully, as if measuring the depth of his mind. "You handled Vera Prime well," she said quietly. "You do not merely react, you anticipate. You see patterns where others see chaos. This is remarkable for a human. But the success belongs to the teams as much as me. I only guide them. War is not just about battles. It is about influence, perception, and understanding what others fear most." He realized that to truly make a difference, he had to navigate palace intrigue, anticipate threats not only from enemies, but from those who would claim to be allies. The next test came unexpectedly. A neighboring Xylarian system reported unusual activity near the human colonies. A fleet had crossed into disputed space without authorization. Velrissa's advisors demanded an immediate strike, insisting that humans could not handle interstellar conflicts. Elias requested a private audience with the Queen, presenting an alternative approach. "Direct engagement may provoke further aggression," he explained. "We should deploy reconnaissance using humans who can operate quietly, gather intelligence, and find weaknesses. Then we can present solutions that demonstrate capability without escalating conflict." She gave him limited permission, cautioning that failure would have consequences. Elias coordinated the reconnaissance, using human ingenuity to detect enemy movements, gather intelligence, and prepare subtle interventions. The plan unfolded without detection, avoiding unnecessary confrontation. When the fleet returned to Xylarian space, reports showed that the human intervention had prevented potential escalation, preserving both peace and pride for the Empire. Velrissa watched Elias, and for the first time she began to see him not as a subordinate but as a strategist capable of thinking on a galactic scale. She also realized that humans, unlike most species, did not fear risk in the same way. They could take bold steps that others considered reckless, and often their actions succeeded because they were unexpected. Despite the growing respect, challenges persisted. A faction of Xylarian council members plotted to discredit Elias, feeding the Queen false reports and questioning his loyalty. They saw him as a threat to their influence, a human who could undermine centuries of tradition. Elias had to navigate these dangers carefully, using observation, reasoning, and subtle diplomacy. He learned quickly. By listening more than speaking, by asking questions that revealed hidden motives, he began to anticipate plots before they unfolded. When one advisor attempted to sabotage a diplomatic mission by withholding critical information, Elias uncovered the scheme and adjusted the plan without drawing attention. The mission succeeded, and the would-be saboteur was quietly removed from influence. Velrissa noticed these actions, but she did not yet fully trust Elias. She appreciated his intelligence and courage, but the mind of a human was still largely unknown to her. She wondered how such a species could survive and thrive despite their physical limitations. Yet each success, each clever decision, each act of bravery strengthened her growing admiration. Meanwhile, Elias thought constantly of the humans fighting in distant colonies. He knew that success in the palace alone would not save them. He needed to prepare strategies that could protect humanity while building trust with the Xylarians. He spent long hours studying reports, running simulations, and consulting secretly with both human and alien officers who were willing to cooperate. In quiet moments, he reflected on the differences between humans and Xylarians. Humans relied on intuition and flexibility, improvising when situations changed unexpectedly. Xylarians relied on logic and strict adherence to rules, which made them predictable in some ways. Elias realized that combining these approaches could create solutions that neither species could achieve alone. The Queen, observing him, began to take small steps in trusting his judgment. She provided insights into her empire's structure, warned him of political pitfalls, and even offered suggestions on how to handle council members who opposed him. It was a delicate balance, supporting without overshadowing, guiding without controlling, but it marked a turning point. Velrissa had begun to see Elias as a partner, not merely a human pawn. One afternoon, as Elias prepared for another strategic session, he received a message from Earth. A new alien fleet was approaching human colonies. The situation was critical. Unlike previous times, he felt a surge of determination. He had learned to navigate the alien court, earned respect, and understood how to exploit both human ingenuity and Xylarian strength. Now it was time to act decisively. He presented a plan combining human tactics, speed, and creativity with Xylarian firepower and resources. It was risky, relying on precise timing and the ability to predict enemy movements, but it had the potential to protect colonies and demonstrate humanity's worth. Velrissa reviewed the proposal, noting every detail, and gave cautious approval. As the fleets moved into position, Elias coordinated every step, guiding human commanders and Xylarian officers alike. The operation was tense and dangerous, but his unconventional strategy succeeded. The alien fleet was neutralized without massive losses, and human colonies were safe once again. Reports of the success reached the palace, and murmurs of admiration for the human strategist spread through the court. Velrissa observed Elias with a mixture of pride and curiosity. She realized that humans were more than survivors. They were clever, courageous, and unpredictable in ways that could change the course of wars. And she began to see that the human she had been sent to marry for peace was not just a symbol, but a force that could truly shape the galaxy. Elias Kale, exhausted but exhilarated, stood on the terrace that evening, looking out at the alien city below. The sky glowed with strange colors, and crafts moved like silver fish through the air. He allowed himself a small smile. The first real challenges had tested him, and he had survived. More than survived, he had succeeded. The road ahead was uncertain. Many battles awaited, both political and military. Yet for the first time, Elias felt that humanity had a chance not just to survive, but to thrive. Their ingenuity, courage, and adaptability were their greatest weapons. And with each success, the legend of the human who dared to think differently and act boldly grew stronger in the eyes of both the Queen and the galaxy. For Elias, the journey was only beginning. The challenges would become greater, the stakes higher, and the enemies more cunning. But he had learned one essential truth. A human mind, fearless and creative, could turn even the most impossible situation into an opportunity. And in the heart of the Xylarian Empire, that truth would be tested again and again. The galaxy was not quiet for long. Elias Kale had barely settled into the routines of the Xylarian palace when news arrived that would change everything. A rogue faction within the Xylarian Empire had launched an attack against human colonies without authorization. The fleet struck quickly, and human outposts on the fringes were overwhelmed before reinforcements could arrive. Panic spread among the human settlements. For the first time, it seemed that Elias' diplomatic efforts might not be enough to protect his people. Elias stood before the Queen and her council, studying the holographic map that displayed the fleet's movements. The rebels were using unpredictable maneuvers, attacking supply lines, and retreating before the Xylarian response could adapt. Velrissa's eyes, usually calm and commanding, narrowed in concern. Her advisors argued fiercely, some demanding an immediate strike, others advocating caution. Elias knew that neither approach alone would succeed. "Your Majesty," Elias began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room, "we cannot fight them using traditional tactics. They are agile, unpredictable, and have knowledge of human settlements. We need a strategy that combines human adaptability with Xylarian firepower. I propose a mobile task force, small enough to respond quickly but powerful enough to strike decisively. We can anticipate their movements and protect the colonies without overextending ourselves." Some Xylarian generals scoffed at the suggestion, unwilling to trust a human with tactical authority. Velrissa, however, studied Elias carefully. She had seen his success before, his ability to turn disadvantage into advantage, and she knew that underestimating him now could be a mistake. "Do it," she said finally. "You will have limited authority over select forces. Fail, and the consequences will fall on you." He combined human improvisation with Xylarian technology, devising maneuvers that the rebels would not expect. The first mission was daring. Elias led a small squad through an asteroid field, using the natural terrain to avoid detection. They struck at supply lines, disabling key ships before the main rebel force could react. The Xylarian generals were astonished. What they had considered reckless and likely to fail worked perfectly. Word of Elias' ingenuity spread quickly. Even some of the skeptical council members began to take notice. The humans' ability to anticipate and adapt challenged their assumptions about weakness and strength. While Xylarian strategy relied on overwhelming power and rigid formations, Elias demonstrated that flexibility, intuition, and courage could be just as formidable. Meanwhile, Velrissa watched him closely. She had always respected strength, but Elias showed her a new kind of power, one that relied not on sheer force but on creativity and insight. She began to see him not as a human needing protection, but as a mind capable of shaping the future of the Empire itself. Despite the successes, Elias faced constant pressure. The rebels were clever, and each victory brought new challenges. One fleet attempted a surprise attack on a colony's defense station. Elias anticipated the move, sending a rapid response team to intercept. Using a combination of human tactics and Xylarian technology, the squad outmaneuvered the attackers, capturing several ships and forcing the rest to retreat. As the campaign continued, Elias began to earn not just respect but fear. Across the Empire, whispers circulated about the human who could turn impossible situations into triumphs. Even the rebels, who had once considered humans weak and insignificant, started to recognize that Elias was not a foe to underestimate. One evening, after a long day of planning and coordination, Elias stood with Velrissa on the palace balcony, overlooking the glowing city. The air shimmered with the energy of countless ships moving through space, preparing for the next stage of the campaign. "You have changed how I see your species," Velrissa said, her voice quiet but serious. "I feared humans were too fragile to survive in the galaxy, too limited to influence events on a grand scale. But you are different. That is our strength." Others were outright hostile, seeing him as an intruder in their empire. He knew that every success he achieved would be scrutinized, every decision second-guessed. The next battle tested him in ways he had not anticipated. The rebels had gathered a large fleet, aiming to strike multiple human colonies simultaneously. Traditional Xylarian tactics would have relied on splitting their forces to confront each attack, but Elias saw an opportunity. He proposed concentrating a small, highly mobile strike force at one critical point, using deception to draw the rebels into a trap. Velrissa approved the plan, though reluctantly. It was risky. If the rebels detected the maneuver, human colonies could be lost, and Elias himself might face severe consequences. But the human strategist was confident. He coordinated with both human and Xylarian forces, ensuring that every move was precise and synchronized. When the battle began, the rebels were caught off guard. Elias' force struck quickly, targeting command ships and supply lines, creating confusion and forcing the enemy into a defensive position. The Xylarian fleet joined at the right moment, overwhelming the disorganized rebels. The victory was decisive. Human colonies were saved, and the rebel fleet suffered severe losses. The success solidified Elias' reputation. Across the Empire, even the most skeptical Xylarians began to acknowledge that humans could be more than allies. They could be strategic equals. Velrissa's respect for Elias deepened, though she remained cautious. She knew that power could corrupt, and she watched him carefully, measuring not just his skill but his judgment and character. Elias, however, was not content to rest on victories. He understood that war was more than battles. It was about morale, perception, and the ability to inspire. He began communicating with human colonies, offering guidance, training, and encouragement. He worked to instill confidence, showing that humans could survive, adapt, and even thrive when faced with overwhelming odds. Back in the palace, the council could no longer ignore the impact of Elias' actions. Even his critics had to admit that the human strategies had saved countless lives and shifted the balance of power. Velrissa used his successes to strengthen her own position, subtly reminding the council that the human strategist was an asset, not a threat. Despite growing admiration, Elias faced personal challenges. The weight of responsibility pressed on him constantly. Every decision could mean life or death for thousands of people. He spent nights reviewing reports, planning next moves, and considering contingencies. Yet even in exhaustion, he felt a sense of purpose and clarity. Humanity's survival and its reputation in the galaxy depended on his courage, ingenuity, and determination. One evening, as he stood alone on the terrace, Elias reflected on how far he had come. He had entered the Xylarian court as a young human, uncertain and cautious. Now, after victories and challenges, he had earned not only respect but fear among those who had once doubted him. He understood that humans had qualities others overlooked: creativity, adaptability, courage, and that these traits could change the course of wars. The next morning, a report arrived. The rogue faction was regrouping, planning another series of strikes. Elias and Velrissa convened immediately. "They are learning from our actions," Velrissa said, her voice sharp with concern. "We must anticipate their next moves carefully." This human had become more than a symbol of peace. He had become a force the galaxy could not ignore. In the following weeks, Elias coordinated a series of strategic operations to anticipate the rebels' movements. Using a combination of intelligence gathering, human ingenuity, and selective Xylarian firepower, he disrupted their plans before they could be executed. The rogue faction's fleet suffered repeated setbacks, morale collapsed, and reports of their failures reached the wider empire. Velrissa watched each success with a mix of admiration and caution. She had feared humans were fragile, incapable of surviving in a galaxy ruled by powerful empires. Now she understood that Elias embodied the best qualities of his species: courage, adaptability, and the ability to think beyond the obvious. By the end of the campaign, Elias Kale had transformed the perception of humans across the Xylarian Empire. They were no longer seen as weak or insignificant. They were clever, capable, and even formidable. The Queen herself began to treat him not merely as an ally or pawn, but as a partner in strategy and vision. Elias, exhausted but resolute, stood once again on the palace balcony, gazing at the stars that stretched endlessly across the sky. The battles had been won for now, but he knew the war was far from over. There would be more challenges, more enemies, and more tests of courage and ingenuity. Yet he also knew that humanity had proven itself capable of more than survival. It could inspire fear, respect, and hope across the galaxy. And for the first time, Elias understood the truth he had suspected all along. Human ingenuity, courage, and determination could not be measured by physical strength alone. In the heart of the Xylarian Empire, humans had shown that they could stand, fight, and even change the course of history. The galaxy had begun to take notice of the human who defied expectations. And the legend of Elias Kale, the strategist who combined human intuition with alien technology, was only beginning. Elias Kale knew the quiet was temporary. The galaxy had a way of testing even the strongest, and he had learned that victories often invited new threats. Reports arrived that the rogue faction, weakened but not defeated, was planning something far more dangerous. Whispers suggested they had acquired a weapon capable of annihilating entire colonies in a single strike. Panic gripped the human colonies, and even some Xylarian generals admitted that if the weapon were used, the Empire's influence and humanity's survival could be shattered. Velrissa called an urgent council meeting. Her usual calm was tinged with tension as she looked around the room. "We face a weapon unlike any we have seen. We cannot allow it to fall into enemy hands. Human, your insights will guide our next move." The human approach would be stealth, cunning, and adaptability. "I recommend a targeted strike," he said. "A small, agile team can infiltrate, disable the weapon, and capture the leaders of this faction. A large fleet risks drawing attention and provoking retaliation. We need speed, precision, and surprise." "You propose sending a small team against a heavily armed faction. Do you think humans can manage such a mission?" one demanded. Elias met their gaze steadily. "I do. Humans survive by thinking differently. What seems reckless can be our advantage. We will succeed because we anticipate, adapt, and act when others hesitate." She had seen this human succeed where others would fail, turning bold ideas into reality. She gave him the authority to lead the mission, warning that failure would have consequences. Elias did not flinch. He had learned to focus on what he could control and use every resource available. The preparation was meticulous. Elias assembled a team combining human specialists and Zalarian officers willing to follow unconventional tactics. He trained them in stealth maneuvers, adaptive strategies, and contingency planning. Every member understood that the mission could be lethal, but Elias' calm confidence inspired them. They trusted him, even when the odds seemed impossible. As the team approached the asteroid field, Elias coordinated their movements with precision. Sensors detected enemy patrols, but he guided the team through natural cover and blind spots. Humans' ability to improvise under pressure allowed them to bypass defenses the Zalarians had believed invincible. Every obstacle was met with quick thinking, and the team pressed forward, disabling automated systems one by one. Velrissa monitored the operation from the palace, her usual composure replaced by tense focus. She observed Elias' decisions, noting how he balanced risk and reward. He was not reckless. He calculated every move, anticipating enemy reactions while remaining adaptable. The Queen began to see the full extent of human potential, not just in courage or adaptability, but in the ability to lead, inspire, and make decisions under immense pressure. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. Loyalist ships emerged from hidden positions, attempting to intercept the strike team. Elias had anticipated this. He directed the human pilots to use unconventional flight paths, weaving through asteroid clusters and drawing enemy fire into traps. Zalarian ships, trained in rigid formations, struggled to adapt. The humans struck quickly and decisively, disabling key vessels and forcing others to retreat. Inside the asteroid base, Elias and his team faced automated defenses designed to overwhelm intruders. Sensors, turrets, and energy barriers tested their every move. Elias' strategy relied on human intuition, observing patterns, exploiting weaknesses, and improvising solutions when systems did not behave as expected. They bypassed defenses, neutralized the power source, and secured the weapon before it could be activated. The rebel leaders, realizing their plans had been foiled, attempted to flee. Elias directed the team to intercept and capture them. It was a tense pursuit through narrow tunnels and anti-gravity chambers. Using careful coordination, the team cornered the leaders and forced surrender. The mission was a success. Back at the palace, Velrissa watched the reports come in. She could hardly believe what she saw. Elias had not only neutralized the weapon but also captured key leaders without unnecessary loss of life. His approach combined human adaptability, courage, and strategic thinking in ways the Zalarians had never imagined. "This human is remarkable," Velrissa murmured. "He does not merely act, he understands the larger picture. He adapts, improvises, and succeeds where we would fail." They were respected, even feared by those who had once dismissed them. The Queen summoned him again, this time privately. She regarded him with a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and cautious trust. "You have proven yourself beyond expectations," she said. "Not only in battle, but in judgment and leadership. Humans are capable of far more than I imagined." "Thank you, Your Majesty, but the work is not done. The galaxy is still full of challenges, and we must remain vigilant." Elias worked with both humans and Zalarians, bridging cultural gaps and demonstrating that cooperation, creativity, and courage could overcome even the most entrenched obstacles. He also faced subtle threats within the palace. Some council members remained hostile, plotting to discredit him or undermine his influence. Elias had learned to anticipate such moves, observing patterns in behavior, questioning motives, and acting decisively when necessary. He did not seek conflict, but he did not shy away from it when required. One incident tested him in ways he had not faced before. A council member attempted to spread false reports of human failures to weaken his position. Elias calmly gathered evidence, presented clear facts, and exposed the deception without inflaming tensions. The attempt failed, and the council member's influence waned. It was a reminder that intelligence, patience, and clarity were as important as courage and adaptability in leadership. Throughout these events, Velrissa observed him closely. She had once regarded him as a human symbol of peace, a pawn for diplomacy. Now she saw a strategist, a leader, and a mind capable of rivaling the greatest in her empire. She began to rely on his counsel more openly, seeking his opinion on matters of war, politics, and empire management. Elias, however, remained focused on his mission. His ultimate goal was the survival and advancement of humanity, not personal glory. Every action he took, every plan he devised, had that singular purpose. He balanced diplomacy with strategy, action with foresight and courage with caution. It was a delicate equilibrium, but one he managed with remarkable skill. The culmination of his efforts came when intelligence revealed a larger plot by the rogue faction, a coordinated strike on multiple human colonies, timed to coincide with the weakness of Zalarian forces. The plan was audacious, and failure would mean catastrophe. Elias immediately devised a comprehensive counter-strategy, combining human adaptability, Zalarian firepower, and clever misdirection. The operation required precise timing and flawless execution. Elias coordinated with human commanders on distant worlds, Zalarian fleets in orbit, and local defense forces. The rebels struck as expected, but they were met with unexpected resistance. Human-led forces adapted to every move, responding with flexibility and creativity. Zalarian ships executed coordinated strikes, cutting off supply lines and preventing reinforcements. The battle was intense, but Elias' strategy prevailed. Rebel forces were decimated and their leaders captured once again. Human colonies were safe, and the rogue faction's threat was finally neutralized. Across the Empire, humans were no longer seen as weak or insignificant. They were respected and even feared for their ingenuity and bravery. Velrissa watched Elias once more, her admiration deepening. She had married him symbolically for peace, but she now saw him as a true partner, a mind capable of shaping the destiny of the galaxy alongside her. Humans, once underestimated, had proven themselves formidable. Elias Kale, exhausted but triumphant, stood on the terrace of the palace. The stars stretched endlessly above him, shining like distant beacons of hope. He reflected on the journey so far, from a young human entering an alien court to a strategist who had turned apparent weakness into decisive victories. Humanity's ingenuity, courage, and determination had made all the difference. He understood that the war was not over, but a critical turning point had been reached. Humans were no longer pawns. They were players, respected and feared, capable of shaping events on a galactic scale. Elias had earned that respect through intelligence, courage, and unwavering commitment to his people. And as he looked across the glittering city below, he realized that the legend of humanity had begun in earnest. One human, acting with courage and ingenuity, had proven that the species could rise to challenges no one had imagined. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The galaxy was watching. Elias Kale had proven himself in countless battles, outwitted enemies, and survived challenges that most would have thought impossible. Human colonies, once considered vulnerable, now stood as symbols of resilience. Across the Zalarian Empire, whispers of the human who could change the course of war grew louder. Yet Elias knew that true recognition was not earned through victories alone. It required the consolidation of trust, the demonstration of foresight, and the courage to confront the greatest threats directly. Reports arrived of a final, desperate effort by the remnants of the rogue faction. They had rallied support from discontented systems, gathering a fleet larger than anything Elias had faced before. Their aim was clear: to strike the core of human settlements and destabilize the fragile alliance with the Zalarian Empire. Failure would mean not just the loss of colonies, but the collapse of humanity's hard-won reputation. Elias studied the holographic maps, noting the fleet's projected path, defensive positions, and potential weaknesses. Velrissa entered the command room, her presence commanding attention. "The fleet is unlike anything we have faced," she said, her tone grave. "It moves with precision and coordination. Your plan will determine the fate of millions. Then we will make every move count. Humans survive because we adapt, because we think beyond the expected. We will use that advantage." Instead of confronting the fleet head-on, they would divide it into sections, isolate key ships, and strike with precision. He emphasized that success required coordination, trust, and boldness, a combination humans excelled at. The operation began in the shadow of a massive asteroid belt. Elias' fleet moved silently, using the natural cover to approach the enemy undetected. Scouts reported enemy movements, and humans adjusted their positions with improvisation and quick thinking. The first engagement was a test of patience and adaptability. Rebel ships, expecting a traditional Zalarian assault, were surprised by the unconventional formations and unpredictable maneuvers of the human-led force. Elias directed the strikes with careful precision. Supply ships were disabled, command vessels isolated, and reinforcements cut off. Zalarian officers, trained in rigid tactics, marveled at the humans' ability to anticipate the enemy's moves and adapt in real time. Each success compounded, weakening the rebel fleet and forcing their leaders into desperate positions. Meanwhile, Velrissa observed from the palace, her admiration for Elia's growing. She had once seen humans as fragile, underestimated, and weak. Now she realized that Elias had demonstrated the true strength of his species: intelligence, courage, and adaptability combined with an unyielding will. Humanity was no longer a pawn of diplomacy; it was a force to be reckoned with. As the battle reached its climax, Elias identified the rebel leader's flagship. It was heavily defended, but he saw an opening created by their overextension. He ordered a coordinated strike using both human and Zalarian forces. The assault was risky, requiring precise timing and absolute trust in every pilot and commander involved. Any error could lead to disaster. Human ingenuity shone through. Pilots used unexpected flight paths, exploiting the terrain of asteroid clusters, while ground teams executed synchronized maneuvers that disrupted the enemy's defensive systems. Zalarian technology, applied under Elia's guidance, amplified the effectiveness of the attacks. The flagship was overwhelmed and the rebel leaders were captured. The remaining fleet, leaderless and demoralized, retreated. Victory was complete. Human colonies were safe, the rogue faction defeated, and the galaxy had witnessed the extraordinary abilities of a species once considered weak. Across the Empire, recognition of humans' value grew. They were no longer seen as fragile or insignificant. They were respected, even feared, for their courage, intelligence, and adaptability. Velrissa summoned Elias to the palace once more. She regarded him with a mixture of pride and awe. "You have done more than survive, human," she said. "You have reshaped the perception of your species. You have shown that humans can think, adapt, and lead in ways even we did not anticipate. You have earned the respect of an empire. You are no longer merely a symbol, you are a leader in your own right." And in doing so, they had earned a place of respect and influence among the stars. The weeks that followed were dedicated to consolidating this victory. Elias worked tirelessly with Velrissa and the Council to secure alliances, strengthen defenses, and establish protocols to prevent future threats. He trained human and Zalarian forces together, fostering cooperation and mutual understanding. The once-tense relations between the two species transformed into collaboration, built on respect for shared intelligence, courage, and adaptability. Human colonies began to flourish. Trade routes reopened, resources flowed, and morale surged. Colonists, inspired by Elias' leadership, took pride in their species' accomplishments. They were no longer survivors clinging to fragile hope. They were capable, respected members of a galactic community. Elias also focused on diplomacy. He addressed skeptical leaders across the Zalarian Empire, presenting humans as partners rather than subordinates. He spoke with clarity and conviction, demonstrating that humans could contribute not only through ingenuity in war, but also through strategy, negotiation, and innovation. His reputation continued to grow, spreading throughout systems far beyond the immediate theater of conflict. Velrissa, once cautious and reserved, now treated Elias as an equal partner in decision-making. She sought his advice on policy, military planning, and governance. Their symbolic marriage, arranged initially for peace, had evolved into a genuine partnership, grounded in mutual respect, trust, and shared vision. Together, they began to reshape the Empire's approach to diplomacy, alliances, and defense. Yet Elias remained humble. He did not seek fame or power for himself. Every decision he made was guided by the goal of securing humanity's survival and establishing their rightful place among the stars. He knew that the strength of a species lay not in a single individual, but in its collective courage, intelligence, and resilience. As months passed, humanity's reputation transformed completely. Where once humans had been seen as weak, fragile, and insignificant, they were now recognized as formidable, adaptable, and courageous. The galaxy had learned to respect, and even fear, the human capacity to survive, adapt, and overcome. One evening, Elias stood with Velrissa on the terrace overlooking the palace city. The lights shimmered like stars brought down to Earth, and the hum of distant spacecraft filled the air. For a moment, the tension and danger of the past month seemed distant, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and hope. "You have changed everything," Velrissa said softly. "The galaxy will never see humans the same way again. And you have proven that one human can alter the course of history. I only had the chance to show what my species is capable of." Yet he knew that challenges would always arise. that new dangers and opportunities would test the limits of courage and intelligence. But he also knew that humans had proven themselves capable, and that reputation would endure long after any single battle. The final months of his campaign focused on stabilizing alliances and ensuring long-term peace. He implemented systems to improve communication, coordination, and strategy between human and Zalarian forces. Colonies were reinforced, trade was secured, and diplomatic ties strengthened. The galaxy had begun to recognize humanity not just as survivors, but as respected partners, capable of contributing to both peace and power. As he reflected on the journey, Elias realized that the human spirit was the true weapon and strength. Courage, ingenuity, adaptability, and unity had allowed his species to survive against impossible odds, to earn respect across alien empires, and to establish a lasting legacy. The galaxy had been transformed, not just by battles and strategy, but by the indomitable will of humanity itself. Elias Kale looked up at the stars, each one a distant world, each one a potential challenge or opportunity. He knew humanity's story was just beginning. They had proven themselves capable of extraordinary feats, but there was more to come. And he, as a representative of his people, would continue to guide, inspire, and protect them. The legend of Elias Kale, the human who turned the war and earned the respect of the galaxy, was complete. Humanity had risen, no longer underestimated and no longer vulnerable. They had shown that even a young human with courage, intelligence, and determination could reshape the course of history. And in the heart of the Zalarian Empire, the Queen watched him with pride and respect, knowing that the species she had once doubted had proven itself worthy of her admiration and the galaxy's attention. Elias Kale, the human who had dared to stand against the stars themselves, had not only survived, he had triumphed. And humanity, through him, had begun its rise to a destiny written among the stars.